It's Checkpoint on ENCA and ETV. I'm Nkepile Mabuse. Our focus this week. Homes destroyed in the face of a pandemic.
You just see bobs and guns, shotguns and law enforcement uniform. No one speaks to you.
Despite a court ruling in favor of some of the evictees, the city of Cape Town is not backing down.
It is an incredibly fine line between completed home and unlawfully occupied structure.
Watch the plight of the mother city's poorest citizens on the other side of this. The City of Cape Town's anti-land invasion unit has been hard at work during the lockdown. It's demolished more than 6,000 homes, according to the Department of Human Settlements. Authorities argue theirs is a legitimate fight against land invasions. Informal settlement dwellers who've borne the brunt of repeated demolitions feel the city simply does not care about the poor. Sungani Vacha and Samit Moore spoke to residents who watched on helplessly as their homes were demolished amidst a pandemic. For 21 years, Genola Phillips lived in the seaside town of Hout Bay, just 20 minutes drive from the Cape Town city centre. He shared a one-bedroom apartment with 9 other relatives in this block of flats.
There's problems inside the house that it causes to live upon each other like sardines. And these types of problems, usually it causes a lot of conflict between siblings.
Craving life away from these cramped conditions, Phillips chose this city-owned vacant land right across the road from the block of flats where he grew up to build. The foundation was laid in 2018. Phillips works at the local fish market and makes a couple of R100 a day. Over a period of 2 years, he saved 50,000 rand to build a wooden or Wendy home of his own.
So I didn't actually have the finance to finish the Wendy. I took my time and waited until Easter season has kicked in. I figured I get it enough, so I started to build. And unfortunately, during that time, there was bad weather also, so we couldn't finish. But I was still sleeping here and making sure that nobody can steal the stuff because it wasn't finished yet.
Phillips' home was almost complete when, on the 11th of June, the City of Cape Town's anti-land invasion unit razed it to the ground.
The first time it was, like they said, it was partially built, but I still had people here sleeping and I still slept here also because I had to watch over the wood,
Following the first demolition, Phillips rebuilt and completed the structure. But on July 19th, the anti-land invasion unit was back.
The second time I was actually living in it for 5 days already. So I was occupying it. I had my cousin inside, my brother and my nephew. So they demolished it with all of us inside and they told us to either get out or they will force us out.
Phillips watched as the unit demolished his home again. In this video, neighbors can be heard crying as they too watched on, while officials hammered down pieces of wood, dismantling Phillips's house.
That was the first time I see so many law enforcement officers arrive in Hout Bay, only for one structure. So I kind of felt victimized by them because why only me, My structure was finished. Then new structures in the mountain went up. And those are still standing, but mine was done before them, is done, is gone and demolished because they feel that this is protected ground.
Unfortunately for him, it wasn't only his home that was under attack.
And they shot me like 3 times close range because I was standing there. I didn't do anything to them.
They shot you?
They shot me like 3 times, one on my arm and twice here.
So, was it rubber bullets?
Rubber bullets, yeah. And that was because I wasn't even a threat to them. I didn't even see the guy shoot me twice because he did it so fast. You can see the 2 bullets right next to each other.
Half an hour's drive from Hout Bay lies the mountainous area of Ocean View. Here, 35-year-old Bernadette Rousseau and her 4 children live tucked away from eye view behind these forest trees.
When I decided to move out of the family house, I started renting. That didn't go well for me. I ended up living without water and electricity for 4 months at a time. And I was paying my rent full on every month. So that didn't work for me. I then ended up occupying a city flat, a rental stock flat. I lived there for 4 years. And that was when I got introduced to city in terms of evictions.
Rousseau was served with an eviction order in late 2019. The city said she was illegally occupying a rental stock flat. She claims in the 4 years she lived there, she tried to pay rent, but authorities wouldn't allow her because she had no formal lease. So the unit's account was frozen. The eviction order also stated that she needed to find a new place to live by the 31st of January this year.
The city, in the 4-year struggle, they offered me Wolversrivier as alternative accommodation.
Wolversrivier is in the middle of nowhere, some 25 kilometers away from town, where evicted families are meant to be temporarily placed.
I went to Wolversrivier. I went to go and check it out because that was an option for me. But when I got there and I saw and I spoke to some people in the community that live there, people's been living there for 6 years. They feel like they've been forgotten. So I couldn't see myself going through that, and I declined Wolversrivier, hence the eviction took place. That was my first eviction.
On January 30th, Rousseau and her children were evicted. She decided to build a new home on this piece of land owned by the Ocean View Community Trust. Other families were already living here when the Rousseaus arrived.
Currently we are about 6-7 families living here. The longest people is living here for 10 years, and then there's a family living here for 8 years, and there's a couple of other families that's been here since the occupation. But I like it here. It's very peaceful here.
Since February 2020, her home has been demolished 3 times. The first demolition was on February 4th.
Man, I was sitting at Solomon Square, the Rasta camp, and my daughter came running to me. Her face was burning. She said, Mommy, they broke us down. They pepper sprayed me, they broke us down. It's about 15 minutes away from here, alongside the mountain. I ran back, I got here, everything was just demolished.
The second time was 3 days later, on the 7th of February.
The second one, no documentation, we don't know who is who. You just see bubs and guns, shotguns and law enforcement uniforms and City of Cape Town bubs. No one speaks to you. I tried to ask who's in charge. They just don't acknowledge you. They just come, do their thing, carry us out and they leave. That was on the 7th of February.
The third time was 2 months into lockdown on May 15th. In this video, piles of wood can be seen strewn on the floor where Rousseau's home once stood. 10 other homes were demolished. Beds and wood lay in the open. Rousseau says no court order was presented to her and her neighbours, while the city claims the homes were unoccupied structures.
City saying that the structures were unoccupied, but I have pictures. There was life here. There was people that has actually been living here, and they're saying that it was unoccupied structures. They even took my things. My things. I had a fence up, and they kicked it down. That had nothing to do with the structures that you're coming to demolish or that you're saying you're coming to dismantle, because that's the words that city uses. So they took my material as well. I was left. I think it was on Eid. I woke up, my roof was leaking, half of my sheets was blown off from my place. They left me with nothing.
Every time she rebuilds, it costs her 3,500 rand. Rousseau says her finances are stretched thin with every demolition.
My money is being ripped apart. It's not even really about the monetary value. It's about I'm wanting to provide a safe haven for me and my kids, and I'm being deprived of that.
The city has shown very little care and consideration for her and her family, she says.
It's City of Cape Town. They're ruthless with how they deal, the way that people treat you. They gun-pointed my son when they got here on that same day. I got them at the bottom. Everything was done. They gun-pointed my son for what? He's 16 years old. So, how do you feel about people that feels nothing? We're human beings at the end of the day.
Residents of Etembeni say they were not surprised by the actions of the anti-land invasion unit in this video that went viral on social media. They believe it's indicative of how the city of Cape Town has always treated the poor.
Ibiseyenzekile ngaphambili apha kum bendingayothuka.
A week into lockdown, 32-year-old Nomazocho Nobebe found herself homeless after she was kicked out by her landlord for failure to pay rent. She worked in the hospitality industry, but due to the lockdown, lost her job.
Sawugxothwa kwamphaya ndiye ndazohlala apha empolweni ndaza empolweni ngokwendawo ebivulela abantu babafumane indawo yokuhlala.
A month into lockdown, residents of Empolweni in Khayelitsha had their shacks demolished by the city of Cape Town. This despite the state of emergency regulations which halted evictions during the lockdown period. So they took the city to court. The Western Cape High Court ordered that 49 structures be rebuilt and no new homes be erected on the piece of land. Nobebe didn't make the list of 49. So she and other families moved on to this open piece of land, which they call Etembeni, which means place of hope, not far from Empolweni. They lived in tents like this.
Itente le ebendihlala kuyo sobe sesilala 2 siba yi6 ngoku abashekileyo apha ententeni kuba mna ndiphumile usheke amantombazana ayi4 abahlala apha. Ingxaki yethu ke ngoku intente xana kunetha ibinetha kakhulu.
To weather the storm, they decided to build shacks. But on the 22nd of April, the city swooped in and broke down their homes. This resident can be seen crying in the doorway of her shack, pleading with officials not to demolish her home. But her cries are in vain. She is forced to step aside and watch as bit by bit her home is torn down. Nobebe says no court order was shown to them during the demolition.
Okuva kwethu ke ngokuba ikhona ilantuka like abafana likhona iphepha elisuka i-court order efanele basibonise basixelele iqaphela ba kufanele sisuke ukusibonisa sentsho kangabe nanto enjalo qha baze ngohlobo lokuba babekhaba ilantuka indlu inempahla ingenampahla bebekhaba behamba nabantu abanxibe i-reflector.
The way the city treated them made her feel worthless, she says.
It hurts me so much. Invisa ubuhlungu as a South African citizen, as a mother of my children, ndihlale endaweni enjeni. Ndithi sensithi into endinayo endisizamele ngokwam kufike a rich man from apho asuka khona without informing me, without telling me ndikunika ixesha elingawisusele ndawo kuvele sekuvela indoda esisichaphothi ikhaba icango sekungena abantu abangakubuziyo noma ngubana abangathethi into sebedemolisha. It hurts me so much. It is painful, really.
Another resident of Etembeni is 49-year-old Vuyami Madigana. Before the lockdown, he was a backyard dweller and worked odd jobs which helped him put food on the table and pay rent. But since the lockdown, he says he's fallen on even harder times.
Korora yethu hayi ke yona evele yabetha yandophula kwasendlini. Ngoku ndithetha ndithi kuwe ndihlala nabantwana bodwa unina ubaleke waya kokwabo ngenxa yento kokuba le korora iyasibetha ngoku akutyiwa kwalapha endlini nejobs yanqaba. So umuntu ofana kakandincede ngumkhulwa wami endiza ku emva kwakhe ondishiyela ibele. Athi ke ukwenza naye ezo nto zakhe azondinyengezela loo nto ndifane nam ndiyize endlini kuncunywancunyu.
Madigana has experienced 3 demolitions since moving to Etembeni. He too loses at least 3,000 rand with every demolition. which is why when law enforcement came to demolish his home for the fourth time on July 1st, he stood his ground.
Ndalwa gqithi kuba yintoni indlu yam andifuna ithathwe kwala material babefuna ithatha yokugqibela yile ndiyikoliti le ndiyayibhatala nangoku inoba ngafika laa mntu ngolwesithathu azofuna loo 200 loo 100 rand ndimane ndomnika because ndimxele ndamane ndomchaphazela loo nto ndinayo tode ndigqibe le ndawo naye unexhala lokuba ingazophinda ithathwe ndingayazi uba ndizambhatala ngantoni.
His neighbor, Bulelani Xolani, was captured on video in a tussle with police. The footage shows a naked Xolani repeatedly being wrestled to the ground by officials when he tries to re-enter his home. Madigana says seeing his neighbor being treated that way came as no surprise to him because he's also been manhandled by city officials.
Ibiseyenzekile ngaphambili apha kum bendingayothuki yilaa nto ndisatshoyo nangoku ndithi izindlu zam zintathu iihoki ezichithwe apha ngulaw enforcement kule mhlaba ndihleli kuwo zintathu so ke mna ke banditsala bandikhupha endlini bandijula phandle ndigula ndine-ulcers uyandiva sisi so ke ngoku bandibeka phandle bayichitha indlu yam.
Although living in fear that the anti-land invasion unit may come back, Madigana says he's going nowhere.
Izithathwa ndawaxela amapolisa noba kungenzeka ntoni andihambi ndawo apha babona bafuna uba ndihambe ndifuna umuntu ozosayina ephepheni eli-black and white athi ndiza kumbeka ebackyard yam until afumane indlu yakhe.
Coming up, Cape Town's JP Smith says the city is fighting fire with fire.
Under those circumstances, you are going to get situations where people are hurt.
The law states that you cannot evict or remove anyone from a home they have occupied without a court order. Acting without one is illegal. Mayoral Committee member of Safety JP Smith says the city didn't act illegally when demolishing Genola Phillips's home in Hangburg because he built on the land illegally.
The city is busy with counter-spoliation. So what you must understand is that the Act says that we must act forthwith to remove structures that are built. Now, that is land that is designated for community projects.
Smith insists that illegal occupiers are playing the system. He claims they set up unoccupied structures with personal belongings, forcing the city's hand to get court orders and provide them with alternative accommodation.
But the proof of demonstrating that you've occupied that structure is no more than a claim that you've done so, and the apparent presence of a bed or something resembling a bed or otherwise. Even if we can show that just a few days before us in Hangberg, we know you weren't living there. We know that there was a partial structure. Residents are sending us footage of it. We've got photographs of the partial structure. We demolished the partial structure because residents are complaining about it. You then rebuild the structure. We go there and the court says, well, you demolished it just too late. It is now completed. It is an incredibly fine line between completed home and unlawfully occupied structure.
But Regional Director from the Legal Resources Centre, Cheryl Duss, says the city is playing with definitions.
There is this very grey area about what the city contends to be an occupied as opposed to an unoccupied structure. So essentially what the city is saying is that based on our officials on the ground and their visual observations of what they deem to be an unoccupied structure, they can summarily, without court oversight, without a court order, demolish those structures on the basis that they are counter-spoliating land that has been unlawfully occupied.
Counter-spoliation is the city taking back property illegally taken from it. Duss says the so-called anti-land invasion operations carried out by the city are actually evictions because those homes were clearly occupied and the city needed to follow the letter of the law and get an eviction order.
Section 8.1 of the PI Act makes it a criminal offence to evict somebody without a court order. So persons or city officials that have actually evicted persons without a court order are liable to be prosecuted under that section.
It's on this basis that Phillips took the city to court. The judge ruled that the city failed to, quote, appreciate the plight of our poor communities, the hardships suffered, and what can be described as objectifying the indigent as having no individual rights worthy of recognition. The judge also ordered the city to rebuild Phillips's home. But Smith says the court ruling was flawed.
You are going to make judgment calls on some days that somebody else is going to disagree with. And that's where the court actions come. These same court actions that Johannesburg, Durban, and all the other cities get stuck in every week. However, during this period, we saw the courts rule in favor of Joburg and Durban under the exact same circumstances that the city was found in. Rule in their favor on almost identical circumstances, but in Empolweni against the city. So it's very hard to understand how that happens. That's why you have appeal mechanisms when courts act unreasonably or unfairly. And we avail ourselves of this appeal when it's necessary, but we're not unfair and we're not brutal and we're not inconsiderate of the person's rights.
Following his altercation with the city's anti-land invasion unit, Bulelani Xolani laid charges of torture against the city. Smith says his officials acted within bound, considering the circumstances.
The officers, I think, made every reasonable effort to engage with him. But when a person is determined to create an incident, it's very difficult to prevent them from not doing so. And Mr. Xolani and those circumstances understood exactly what the circumstances of the incident were.
Regarding Phillips being shot, Smith says no one can really know the real circumstances behind the shooting, but that police force was necessary.
Where a small group of people will act very violently in response to the anti-land invasion action, and therefore you need to go with a substantial staff contingent.
Even so, Das says the unit has shades of our past when black people were dispossessed, and this cannot be justified in a constitutional democracy.
The anti-land invasion unit does not fall within the ambit of the Police Act. So they're not regulated. So it's difficult to say why the city of Cape Town feels it necessary to militarize them.
Smith says working conditions are harsh.
When the circumstances are as volatile as I've described to you, where people are playing for a gallery, recording incidents which they're trying to frame, threatening officials, under those circumstances, you are going to get situations where people are hurt.
In the face of this pandemic, evicting somebody from their home is a potential death sentence.
Despite their illegality during the lockdown, evictions have continued unabated, not only in Cape Town, but across the country. Surely, these are the actions of uncaring authorities, placing lives already at risk in graver danger. Thanks for watching Checkpoint. I'm Etembeni.